All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on another ADOS Kansas City discussion. Today we have myself, Kiera, Brian, Miss Al, and Layton joining us. We are also going to have a special guest, Mr. William Darity. He is the co-author of From Here to Equality, Black Reparations or Reparations for Black Americans. Today we'll be discussing um, reparations advocacy in 2021, post 2020, post COVID, post everything that has been going on this year. We'll also be discussing election results in Missouri and how they will affect Black Americans. So, again, thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe to our channel. Um, like this video. If you have any comments that you want to discuss, please add those in the comment section. And also, please share this with your family and friends. All right, so let's get started. First order up for the day is the election. So, what are your thoughts on the presidential election, on Missouri's elections with the governor, lieutenant governor, and all those other offices? The amendments that passed, what are your thoughts on those? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. I'm not surprised by any of the results, unfortunately, including Amendment 3 going down. There's just so much gamesmanship in initiative titling on ballots, and I don't think that people saw the initial aspects of Amendment 3 and the ban on corporate or the reduction to zero on lobbying gifts, from $5. Like, it was just such a nominal, it was such a sleight of hand, and so I would continue, but it looks like we have a new guest. So I'll kick it back to you, Kira.
Hello.
Kiara, you muted. Kiara, you muted.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we do have a guest joining us, William A. Darity, the co-author of From Here to Equality. Thank you so much for taking some time in your Saturday to join us today. We are here to discuss reparations and the economy and how Black Americans are going to recover from COVID. And we are so excited to have you here to add to those discussions. So welcome.
Thank you. And Kirsten is coming in a moment. Oh, here Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
So we were so thrilled that there was an ADOS group that was reading our book, and so we invited ourselves to join you.
Yeah. No, it was more than welcome. I've always, like I said from the beginning of ADOS Kansas City, that it was critical that we get that foundation of knowledge just to start off. And so one of the first things we did was read through your book, and it was so much to unpack. There's tons of information in there, lots of resources to aid in further research, and lots of information that we can use in our arguments and our debates, and just passing information on to the rest of Kansas City and Missouri as a whole state.
Well, thanks. Yeah. So we'll sit back and listen until you're ready to talk with us.
Sure. Well, no, we're actually ready now. We how we do it is we kind of like have we have questions as topics, and then each of us will kind of go around and give our own perspectives on each issue. So since you're here, we can definitely start. And also, we usually have a discussion for about a good 2 hours and 30 minutes. So we really go into a lot. So don't feel that you're obligated to stay the entire time. Like if you have to go, we completely understand.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think we can just start right off with the economy. So we're heading closer towards the end of the year, and there's been a lot of talk about how we're going to recover. You know, especially in Missouri, there have been articles in Economist. Frank Link from the Mid-American Regional Council has said that, you know, in Missouri, we're projected to not fully recover from COVID until 2024. And this is because, good morning, Deb, Miss Deb. Most upper and middle class white Americans have recovered if they were affected at all. However, Black Americans are still, I believe, 1/3 of our jobs, or just 1/3 of our jobs, have recovered so far. And we are, as a collective, expected not to recover fully until 4 years from now. So I guess the first question I have is, with that information, how do you expect Black Americans to go about daily life? Like, how will our lives, how have they changed? How will they continue to be affected as we go into the coming years post-COVID?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying, first of all, just thank you so much for inviting us. This is a delight to be with you this morning. You know, Black lives have already changed dramatically under COVID. We've been extremely hard hit by the disease itself in terms of exposure, and that's a consequence of, many Black people having jobs that require them to be in contact with a lot of people, either because they're working in healthcare or adult care or child care, or transportation, or food service, the so-called essential workers who are themselves dispensable. And, even before COVID, the majority of Black Americans were working in jobs that were lower paying. And so, they did not have the kind of cushion that one needs in a pandemic to withstand the shocks of job loss or catastrophic health event, or having your hours reduced significantly. Black people, for the most part, have not been the folks whose jobs could be managed from home. And consequently, they had no choice but to get out. And
if their job,
if their job existed, they had to leave home and place themselves and their families in danger. So that's the first part. We also know that 40%, upwards of 40% of all Black businesses have evaporated under COVID. Already more than half of the Black banks had folded since 2009. So recovery is a very complicated, picture for Black Americans. We also disproportionately were disadvantaged with the various CARES relief funds. Individuals, small businesses, middle-sized businesses, in no case were Black Americans receivers of their proportion that they represent in the population of those funds.
Yeah.
It's not a rosy picture.
Yeah, recovery without some massive public intervention is unlikely. I mean, I'm not sure how recovery could be charted unless something is taken, like the introduction of a reparations plan.
Oh, go ahead, Kiara. Were you about to speak?
Can you say that again?
No,
Yes, I was gonna say just that I know Black Americans have been projected to be an essentially wealthless class by 2053, but surely the that date has been expedited due to COVID. I'm just kind of curious about by how much. You know,
So,
like
yeah, it's a great question. We don't really know the answer yet. We're in the process of trying to gather survey data that would give us a better degree of insight about how much Black wealth has been relatively damaged as a consequence of COVID-19. I think Kirsten mentioned estimates that upwards of 40% of Black businesses have gone out of operation. That clearly has strong implications for Black wealth, which is low in the first place. But we don't have any detailed numbers yet, and I hope that there's a research project that we're trying to conduct out of my research center at Duke, and I hope we can provide people with a clearer picture of how bad, how severe the damage has been as a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, perhaps within a couple of months.
What do you feel like are the consequences if we don't get the type of legislation or policy we need here in the next figure 4 to 5 years? Because like how I understand it, with wealth plummeting, and then when you introduce the coronavirus and all of the systemic effects of that, knowing that ADOS people are on the bottom of everything we just mentioned, how do you, like, what do you forecast ADOS America will look like in a post-COVID, in a post-COVID America, or during COVID? Because I feel like this winter, things are going to ramp up. More people are getting sick. Jobs. I don't think the job market is going to increase. Like, what do you think the state of Black America will look like in the next figure 13, 16 months?
Well, there are two things that come to mind for me. One is that our population growth rate is going to drop. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will be losing numbers, but the rate at which we increase our numbers is already dropping because of the aggravated mortality. And the other thing is we're going to be, I think, confronted with even more severe exposure to homelessness because of the evictions that are going to follow. That are going to follow the loss of income that people are experiencing in such a drastic way. So, yeah, I mean, I wish I could say something that was more optimistic, but things actually just look really bad at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I prefer them to be more realistic than optimistic. I'd rather deal with whatever the reality is.
Yeah.
More so than guess. But another question I wanted to ask. So one thing that, based on all the research that we've been doing, I know I've pretty much come to the conclusion that the only way in order to fix the ADOS condition in America is, with specific policies for a specific group. And I wanted to ask you specifically, is there any fix in Black for the ADOS condition in America that involves other parties? Like that involves giving resources to not only our community, but minority, people of color, et cetera, et cetera.
So,
Depends on what you're trying to fix.
Yeah, depends on what you're trying to fix.
Yeah.
But there are a number of universal programs that Sandy and others have advocated that you can talk about, from a federal job guarantee, which might be the first thing to kind of talk about, but also, the so-called baby bonds project, for example,
National
Health Insurance Program, efforts to create national Wi-Fi, for everyone, but not just the broadband, but also equipment and training, for everyone. But maybe, so are you all familiar with the federal job guarantee?
I'm I'm familiar with the one that's listed in like in the ADOS.
So maybe we can talk about that just a bit.
Yeah. So the premise here is that every adult American would be guaranteed or assured a job if they so desire it through the public sector. And all of these jobs would pay at least the equivalent of what's required to get people above the poverty level, and also provide them with a benefits package that would be similar to the package that's available to all federal civil servants. So it would be inclusive of health insurance. And in the process, we would force the private sector to improve the conditions of compensation that it gives to all Americans, because if the private sector didn't match the compensation that was available through the federal job guarantee, nobody would work in the private sector. So they would have to at least do that. So it's a way of raising the floor on compensation for all Americans. And it's stronger than trying to rely upon minimum wage legislation, because the minimum wage laws are inapplicable if you don't have a job, right? Your minimum wage is zero if you don't have a job. And in addition, minimum wage laws do not ensure that you will have a sufficient amount of hours of work to be eligible for benefits. And so that's the premise behind the federal job guarantee. Essentially, you would eliminate working poverty in the United States. But this would be a universal program. It would be for all Americans. It would be beneficial to Black Americans to have some assurance that they would not fall into poverty. But if your concern is eliminating the racial wealth gap, I don't think you can do that without having a project that is specific to Black Americans and more precisely specific to Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And that's what we mean by reparations. So yes, we can improve people's lives by adopting a variety of universal programs. But if we want to eliminate the racial wealth gap, we really can't do that by relying on universal programs.
So should that be, and I guess for me, because in a lot of conversations that I have, like it's specific ADOS. Like if it's not about an ADOS solution, I do believe those programs should exist, and there should be those policies that, like you say, raise the floor for everybody. But I guess from my perspective, I really see it as a sweep around your own front door first type of situation. Like, okay, like I agree that's an issue, but my mother, father, sister, brother, we suffer from something for a specific reason. So I guess my follow-up question is, when we start to prioritize the agendas that we're pushing, whereas if we have the federal jobs guarantee for all African Americans, for all Americans in general, and then as opposed to a reparations from a Black community, or more specifically an ADOS community, should we be lobbying or pushing or advocating for, what should we prioritize? Because my understanding is we should probably prioritize the reparations because that's our community first. Because based on the research that I've done, based on your books and other things I've read, the rising tide doesn't lift all boats. And even in America where you raise the floor, you still have an ADOS America at the bottom of the floor, even if everybody gets those jobs guarantees. So what is
the difference between, there's a difference between addressing inequality and addressing poverty. They're not the same things. Okay. And so yeah, I agree with you entirely. Yeah.
Gotcha. It's important to raise, the ADOS community members who are impoverished out of poverty. But we need to do more. So to that point, I think it is essential that you petition and lobby Congress to enact a national reparations program. And this can be done, individuals could write letters. You could also create a resolution that is sent, can gather signatures. Durham, North Carolina, where we live, the city council unanimously passed a resolution advocating for a national reparations program. And importantly, it also does three things. It specifies who the recipients of the reparations program should be. It speaks to the question of how, the solution, the target being the elimination of the racial wealth gap. And it also specifies the importance of direct payments to individuals as opposed to funds being given to the United Way or to a community organization or to some other cultural group that would manage those funds for the eligible recipients. We've seen too many times when the funds get diluted, when other groups are taking their cut or have their own agendas about how the money should be spent. We believe that the Black American descendants of U.S. slavery are fully capable of determining how they would spend those funds themselves. And we're certainly not opposed to pre-reparations preparation, in the form of, classes, workshops,
political literacy,
literacy, strategies for investment, strategies for saving. What are your goals? What do you want to do short term? What do you want to do long term? And what's the best way to do that? But also fraud protection, because that the minute that a reparations program is enacted, the sharps, the grifters are going to set up their own shops, and they're going to be, they're going to be working as hard as you are, or harder. It's like, oh, payday,
You get a lot of messages from
I'm
Nigerian
sorry,
princes
everybody.
in your email.
Right. So, I think that's really important. One of the things that we had suggested was that, the Reparations Commission not only set up offices around the country that would aid individuals in making their claims, because for eligibility, we talk about both a lineage standard and an identity standard. These are individuals who would need to prove that they were descended from at least one person who was enslaved in the US, and also that individuals had self-identified as Black, African-American, Negro, Afro-American 12 years minimum before, prior to the enactment of a reparations program or a study commission on reparations. And then the last piece that's part of the Durham, North Carolina resolution for a national reparations program is they also advocate for HR 40 to be revised.
Yeah, we have those hearings.
Yeah, because a document as written is not going to achieve true reparations. And so, if the Kansas City ADOS group, would like to be in touch with the Durham City Council, I think that would be an excellent idea to take a look at what they created in terms of a resolution. But this can be done on an individual basis. Your families could do it.
The resolution's available.
Right, the resolution's available, but I'm saying individuals could, create or copy or just use that document, but also your family level or the folks that you work with, or your a book group or your bid-whist group, in all of the groups that you belong to formally and informally could petition Congress for a national reparations program. I think this is something that has merit.
Yeah.
When we discussed the qualifications, something that we discussed in prior meetings, we discussed having a descendant of an American slave. At a certain point, like we were aware that before the Immigration Act of 1965, Black immigrants were less than 1% in America. But one thing we were going back and forth on, and I want to get you guys' insight on, because I felt like we had the conversation that kind of mellowed out a little bit. When we begin to have biracial people, how does that work? Because I know personally, I was like, I definitely believe that they deserve reparations. But I was trying to figure out what are the differences, like when we talk about access to whiteness and being able to access capital and all of these different things within a given community. So have we been able to differentiate the differences in a multiracial descendant of American slavery and or with one parent, as opposed to someone that has two. Because from my understanding, those would be vastly different in most cases. I mean, of course, not all, but do we still feel regardless of how many ancestors you have, it's the same amounts? Once it breaks down, or does it change based on?
So the criteria we have is not based on fractions. An individual would have to show that they have at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. So whether they have two biracial parents or one black parent and one white parent, as long as through the black sides, they have at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States, then they meet that condition. But there's a second condition, which has to do with their sense of self-identity. And that's the condition that says you have to have reported or classified yourself as Black for at least 12 years before the enactment of a reparations plan or the enactment of a study commission for reparations. So if somebody is multiracial, biracial, but they identify as Black, or they identified as Black at a point where there was no financial gain associated with identifying as Black, they're fully eligible.
With some very interesting scenarios. So, we learned that Barack Obama, for example, is eligible.
No, he's not.
But sorry, hold on.
Okay.
We learned that Barack Obama's children are eligible because of, well, in part because of Michelle, but also because of their white relatives. Like his mother has Black relatives.
Yeah, but
right?
but there's another.
But the question
Go
is,
ahead. Yeah.
How did they identify?
Well, no,
But
there's another issue, which is her Black relatives who were enslaved.
Yes, we're
free by 1776.
Right, which is a starting point for us, right? So, for some people, the starting point is 1619.
And it should be.
And we, for us, the starting point is 1776 because the culpable party to pay reparations to Black Americans is the government, and it didn't exist before 1776. Okay, so yes, you're correct. Barack Obama's mother's family members who had been enslaved were free by 1776.
And actually,
but his children would qualify because of their mother.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about Barack Obama's ancestry on his mother's side, I believe that this is that he's related to the Bunches, like Ralph Bunche and
I did that.
All right, Brian.
But part of the point is to prevent people from opportunistically waking up Black tomorrow, and saying, "Oh, by the way, yeah."
All right, Brian, do you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up on this second criteria, we went in the course of that conversation, like 3 weeks ago or so, we were talking about how, you included, self-identification on federal documents and whatnot. And in some cases, census documents will allow for a mixed race selection. So would that, is that included in someone self-identifying as Black if they
check the Black column? I mean, they may check other things, but as long as they check the Black column, from our perspective, they should be eligible.
So do they have to check? Sorry, I'm an attorney by trade. Do they have to check both?
They don't have to exclusively check the Black column in the way in which we've been thinking, but that's something that we're willing to discuss and explore further.
I mean, that option has not been available for 12 years.
Yeah, right.
Right. So the question would be, if reparations were to happen, in 2020, what were they doing in 2008?
Yeah.
And had they been consistent?
Or more precisely, they would have to use the 2000 census, actually. Probably.
Right. But I'm saying, how have they identified since 2008?
And just out of curiosity, how did you arrive at the 12-year threshold? It's such a fascinating number.
So initially we were thinking, 10 years, but then we thought, 2 senatorial terms.
Yeah.
Right. So that was where that number came from.
Yeah, but it's somewhat arbitrary.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah.
Oh, the other part of this that you didn't ask about is, Black Americans whose families migrated to the U.S. after Jim Crow, which is the case for most Black people who came here from the Caribbean or from the continent. With the exception of folks whose families were connected to various embassies, you really didn't have more than about 1%.
That's what's
population coming into the U.S. And so, but many of them will say, well, we're treated as badly, we're discriminated against, just like, the Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. Shouldn't we be eligible for reparations? And so I guess we have, a more nuanced response to that. So the first piece for us is, when you migrate to a country, and they came voluntarily, right? They were not brought here on slave ships. They were not kidnapped. They were not forced into enslavement for a lifetime and that of their children. But when you come to this country voluntarily, whether you're here from the continent or from the Caribbean or from Europe, you migrate to a history and to its obligations. And so, my guess is that part of what attracts these individuals to the United States is the world that they see here, the world that the slaves built. They're attracted to the financial institutions, they're attracted to the media, to the physical landscapes. All of this was made possible because of 400 years of forced labor for Black people.
Yeah.
So the idea that you could come here and, say, oh, I want a taste of that. But then you discover that, oh, wait, because you look like the Black people who've been here, you're being mistreated. Now you want to ask for reparations. That's problematic to us.
Mhm.
Now, it is the case that those individuals may well be due reparations, but not from the U.S. government.
Yes.
They should look to the countries that colonized and enslaved their ancestors and appeal to those countries. So if you're from Jamaica or from Antigua or for Trinidad, then that would be the United Kingdom. If you're from Haiti, that would be France.
Yeah.
There's a long list of potential.
if you're from the capital, it's Belgium.
There's a long list of potential countries, states, to tax, for reparations, but it would not be the United States.
Isn't that why NARC and COBRA exist? Isn't that what their purpose is?
I don't know that that's why they exist, but that is, that seems to be more and more part of their position.
It's an interesting question that you raised, because I think when NCOBRA comes into existence, it emerges out of the efforts of Queen Mother Audley Moore, and people who were her disciples ultimately form NCOBRA initially. And her project was specifically for reparations for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. So that's a really interesting question as to how this more global or trans-African view came into play in terms of their notions of who should be eligible for reparations. I'm not sure of the historical moments where that change took place. But originally, Queen Mother Audley Moore's efforts were focused entirely on descendants of U.S. slavery.
I mean, I would say there's a direct link between, people like Callie House, who was trying to, get reparations for, folks who were immediately emancipated from slavery, and also pensions for the Black Civil War veterans, to Marcus Garvey, to
Queen Mother.
There's a kind of a direct line, there, and so it's I don't know. So it's like I say, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to
Yeah, and that's
that.
fine.
You know, when did they kind of veer off?
Yeah. But if you look at NARC's 10-point plan for reparations, it is clear that they are talking about African peoples writ large, rather than Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's in that 10-point plan is they want to form something that they call a National Reparations Trust Authority, which is supposed to manage the funds for the reparations project. They do not tell us who is going to be responsible for having authority over the authority.
Yeah.
And that's another break point for us, where we think the priority use of the funds must be direct payments to eligible recipients.
Yes. So
I have a question about that, because I just, in the chat, I just shared a video from NCOBRA where they did a town hall about reparations. And in that town hall, they had a panelist who said that HR 40 should be passed as is. They spoke on people, they call them naysayers, who say that the bill should be edited, and they disagree with that the bill should be passed as is. Now that's clearly out of alignment with what ADOS has been pushing for. So when you have organizations like NCOBRA, who is aligned with NARC, who advocate for reparations, yes, but not an ADOS specific reparations agenda, how should we go about pushing for the edits on HR 40 when they have panelists who were saying that those edits are not necessary?
So we're getting ready to send you a link to a document that that Sandy wrote, which speaks specifically to the points of HR 40. I mean, we've been kind of working on this for a while, but you know, the major points are all together here in this document. You know, I don't think that it's altogether surprising that HR 40's content has changed. You know, many people assume, and we did too, I think initially, that the bill had just been sitting for 30 years, you know, since 1989 when John Conyers first introduced this, but that's not the case. It's been revised several times. And it wasn't even always called HR 40. you know, take a look. But more recently, you know, 2016-17 and 2017-18, some very substantial changes were made to the bill.
okay.
And this is when you begin to see more of, you know, these effects. Not only that, you know, the number of commissioners has increased dramatically. I think it started with 7, now it's 13. And the assumption is that the 6 new members would be individuals from NARC and NCOBRA, you know, potentially. There's now a salary component, GS 18, which is a $200,000 plus salary. Okay. There never was a directive for the commissioners to come up with a roadmap for the reparations plan. Like, what exactly, you know, should the reparations plan include? And also, there was never an endpoint. So, you know, there's nothing to stop these individuals who are receiving these $200,000 a year salaries from just winding that out, you know, indefinitely. You know, it needs more study. You know, we need more data. Another year or 2, we should have it. You know,
Could we?
I mean, we'd like to see, you know, them given specific instructions to do their work in 18 months. This is what the length of time.
I'm sorry.
Well, this is the length of time that the Japanese American Commission, the Commission on Wartime relocation and internment of civilians took. They had done the research, conducted hearings across the country, and written up their report called Personal Justice Denied, all inside of 18 months.
Yeah.
And we think that the Black Reparations Commission should do the same.
Kiara, you were trying to ask something.
Yes, I was gonna say, could we kind of pivot and talk about what should be included in a reparations agenda? I know, like, earlier we were talking about post-election results or the effects on Black Americans. Earlier this week, I saw a post where someone was asking, now that the results are coming in, what should Black Americans ask for as part of an agenda for the next year? Reparations right now, it's in the mainstream media. It's getting a lot of attention.
Yeah.
People are increasingly
amazing from my
Right.
perspective.
Right.
yeah, but it's still not law.
Right.
Right.
So right now, what can, I guess the first question is, right now, what could Black Americans ask for that would help them? And then we'll kind of hopefully get into the differences between like locally based programs versus federal reparations. So the first question is, what can Black Americans ask for now that would help them?
I mean, whether or not we'll get a response that's proper is another issue. But no, I mean, Kirsten and I both, I think, believe that it's always been an appropriate time to insist on reparations. And so there's no difference in the present moment that that's something that should be put forward as an essential step to be taken on behalf of the needs of Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And I think Kirsten talked about the three central attributes that we feel a reparations plan must fulfill: eligibility, the total amount, and the direct payments to individual eligible recipients. And so we also think that those conditions should be placed in legislation that would be the equivalent of H.R. 40 for the creation of a study commission. The study commission should be directed to design a reparations plan that has those three features.
All right, Miss Al, I saw your mic is up. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because, it seems like people are like, oh, well, the election came and went and we didn't have reparations, so what now? So I just wanted to clarify that our main demand should always be reparations.
So, and this should also be something I didn't hear that I wanted to ask. In addition to the specificity of who it goes to and the direct payments, would you also consider a multi-generational plan, a multi-generational policy to be a part of reparations? Because from how I understood it, this wouldn't just be like a one-time thing. Like, this is reparative justice.
It's a one-time thing. Well, perhaps over 10 years.
Right.
But it's a one-time thing for multiple generations.
Generations.
40 million living Black Americans in principle would be eligible for this proposal.
Gotcha.
And so for folks who are below the adult years, their funds would be held in a trust until they reached adulthood.
Okay.
But yeah, there would be multiple generations, currently living generations, who would receive reparations
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Now we do know that it took even in the case with the Japanese Americans who were wrongfully interred in World War II, we're talking about just under 120,000 people who received $20,000 each. And for us, the amount would be the same for each individual. It wouldn't be based on your income. It wouldn't be based on your wealth. It wouldn't be based on how much you've been discriminated against. It wouldn't be based on, skin color, any of these things. If you met the criteria, then you qualified. Now, you could decide for whatever reason that you didn't want to receive the reparations. Right? And maybe your funds would go back into the general pot. Right? And for people who, feel for whatever reason, that this would be, some people have said things like this would be a black mark on our ancestors, or this would be accepting the designation of victim. This would cause me psychological trauma.
As if we haven't been victimized.
Well, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to an individual's personal experience or how they would respond to, an opportunity to receive, an average of, $800,000, $850,000 per household. But those individuals would certainly be within their right to say, count me out. I don't want to be included. And that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to say that it took several years, even given the smaller numbers of the Japanese Americans who received reparations, it took several years to pay them out.
A much smaller amount.
A much smaller amount of money and a significantly smaller number of people, but it took several years to pay that out.
And that's fine.
Excuse me?
I'm saying that's fine. I know something I hear echoed a lot is, we don't really budge on the amount. We look at all different formulas, how they, calculate what the amount is. I know one of the guys I heard, I forget his position, but he was a German guy, and he was giving us the equations on how they did the reparations.
Oh,
Thomas Kramer. Okay.
Thomas Kramer. Yeah. Thomas is a good friend of ours.
But got his name.
Yeah.
From
So,
University of Connecticut, right?
yeah. So understanding that, once we secure the debt, from the people that I have most of the conversations with, we're not too much of a stickler on how the payments are made, just that the debt doesn't change. As long as we can stay, hard fixed on the debt, how we pay it out, and, how it goes is, a further discussion.
Well, I presume you're saying as long as it's being paid directly to individuals, because there certainly are strategies for paying out the funds that I would find deeply problematic.
Programs. I don't think they should go to programs.
Right. Or, some people have said, well, we will target communities where redlining occurred. Well, people don't stay fixed in neighborhoods
forever. Yeah.
And, what often happens is, once a community is targeted for an increase in amenities, the taxes, the property taxes go up, and, folks who are less well endowed have to move. And then the actual recipients would not be Black American descendants of
they would be whoever was there.
Right.
So, in the election,
I was going to say, I have a quick question, just a couple of follow-ups. I think we should also talk about what reparations is and what it is not, because I think in September we did have an economist from Iowa write an article about the local case for reparations in Missouri or in Kansas City. And they did include all the data about redlining and restrictive covenants, but then it kind of said the solution to that was investing in poor neighborhoods. Now, we all know that what that means. That's a recipe for gentrification. Right. However, the article did state that there were going to be measures in place to prevent that from happening. I don't know how you would keep other investors from coming into the neighborhood and people being able to afford to remain in their homes for decades after. But I think I hope we'd be able to clarify why just merely investing in local neighborhoods should not be considered reparations, and in that case, what could be. Like, how do we enable people to be able to afford their homes, to build wealth in their homes, to invest in their neighborhoods without being pushed out of them?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So for us, the goal of reparations is the elimination of the racial wealth gap, right? Just straight up. So all of these other programs, investing in strategies to reduce redlining or to offset the effects of redlining, while they may have a positive effect on the Black residents in those communities, at least on the short term, those programs are not going to change the wealth position of those Black individuals. That program is not going to put money in their pockets. It might protect temporarily the value of their homes, but that will not in any way, shape, or form approximate $800,000 per household. We like to use an analogy that Malcolm X talks about. He says, if you stab, and he uses himself in the analogy. So if you stab me with a knife, and the knife goes in 9 inches, if you pull it out 3 inches, that helps, but I'm still bleeding, right? If you pull it out 6 inches, even if you pull the knife out completely, you have not healed the wound. And so the kinds of programs, Kiara, that you're talking about are ones that will partially heal the wound, but they will not. I'm sorry. These are the programs you're talking about are ones that are the equivalent of partially removing the knife, but not completely pulling it out. And so we would also put these different city programs in the same boat, or scholarships. Everyone's not poised to take advantage of a scholarship. If you're 70 years old or even 50 years old, you may not be prepared to go back to college and take advantage of that scholarship. And the scholarship may not be transferable. You might say, oh, I'll take that scholarship, but I'll give it to my nephew or I'll give it to my neighbor. That's not the way these things usually work. They're one-to-one for the most part. So when the cities are like Asheville, North Carolina, near us, is one that has said, we're going to go back and look at the contracts that the city regularly, negotiates, look at who's on the commissions, who's on the committees across the city, and we're going to engage the Black community. I think the Black community in Asheville is something like about 16-17%. And so our thinking is, well, this is what they should have been doing all along, and we feel somewhat proprietary about the term reparations, and we wish that these cities, colleges, and other institutions would not call these programs reparations, because they are not eliminating the racial wealth gap. They do have the potential to create goodwill, and these are programs that they should be doing all along. Of course, Black people should have been eligible for their, representative share of those contracts and commissions. And we salute these entities for going back and doing the right thing finally, but don't call it reparations.
Call it racial equity initiatives, right, or something else.
Something else besides reparations. I mean, because the risk is when you get a handful of these on the books, people say, oh, you've got reparations. You got the program in Asheville, you've got a program with the police in Chicago, you've got the state of California talking about some kind of, program to reduce the racial wealth gap. What else do you want?
I mean, one of the things that's really important here, I think, is that if you were to take the budgets for all the state and local governments in the United States, every single one of them, and add up those budgets, it would amount to about $3.1 trillion. Now, we estimate that what would be required to eliminate the racial wealth differential in the United States is somewhere in the vicinity of $10 to $12 trillion. So even if you took all of the state and local budgets, combined them and devoted them to reparations so that states and localities couldn't spend on anything else, they couldn't provide any services whatsoever. Even if you did that, you would fall $7 trillion short. So so I think it becomes meaningless for states and localities to claim that they're executing a reparations plan of any significance if the goal is to eliminate racial wealth differences in the United States.
Would affirmative action be one of those plans?
No.
It would
Like,
be one of those.
It would be affirmative action as it,
The
like
goal
saying,
of affirmative action is
yeah.
not eliminating the wealth gap, the
right.
racial wealth gap.
Yeah, affirmative
It's about
action
discrimination.
right.
is reducing or reversing discrimination.
Yeah.
So it's as if what Kirsten mentioned, it's pulling the knife out
A little bit.
It's not healing the wound.
Right.
You're not providing people compensation for the harms of the years of discrimination when you have an affirmative action program.
This is like a program in is it Prince Edward County, Virginia,
Oh yeah.
where
Yeah.
rather than integrate the schools in the 1950s, they said, we'll just close all the public schools, period. And so for 5 years, there were no public schools in the entire county. Now, simultaneously, whites who could afford to do so created private schools that, of course, were segregated. And the county, was the county, the state, provided vouchers. The state provided vouchers to them to offset the expenses of their white children attending those white schools.
That was the creation of the first use of vouchers,
Right.
educational
That's the
vouchers.
history of vouchers in this program, right?
To
To enable
segregation.
white kids to go to school without having to sit next to Black children. So if you were a Black person in that county and you had a family member in another county or another state who would, welcome your children as guests, then they could continue their education. But for the most part, Black people in Prince Edward County, Virginia, did not get a high school education for those 5 years. Some 35 or more years later, finally, basically an individual, a philanthropist, decided that he would raise the funds to create scholarships for these individuals. But now we're talking about people who are, in their late 50s or older, And so, and again, it wasn't that they were compensated for the income they might have received if they had finished high school, gone to college if they chose to do so, or done some other kind of training and had jobs at that higher pay level. They didn't get, compensation for the pensions that they lost out on. Just, what was offered to them was college scholarships.
In the state of Virginia.
Right. If you still lived in Virginia, if you were aware of this program, just a whole lot of ifs. And so this was clearly a piecemeal reparations program, and one that really, good-hearted. It's wonderful that someone thought, we need to address this, but it was not a reparations program.
Yeah, I think that there's a phrase that we sometimes use about education, and I think we're both passionate advocates of education, but I think people have to be more honest or realistic about what the effects of educational attainment are, and I think there's a reflexive response that people frequently have to throw scholarships on the problem, right? But one of the most disturbing facts that have emerged from the research that's been done on the racial wealth gap is the fact that now Black heads of household who have a college degree have $20,000 less in net worth than white heads of household who never finished high school. So if you are concerned about eliminating the racial wealth difference in the United States, you're not going to solve the problem by giving Black Americans more scholarships, because already educational attainment does not at all close the racial wealth differential.
And I think it also becomes a question of where is our reparations funds being invested? If we get cash payments from reparations, and then they're immediately fed right back into the systems that have disparaged us for all these centuries. That's not really helping us. You know, if,
Oh, never mind.
I'm not sure I understand.
I
So you're
think
saying,
she's
well, I'm
talking
saying,
about-
yeah,
if we immediately, if
think
we
she's talking
spend them, or
Yeah, I think she's talking about the what we call
yeah,
the
let's say,
correct,
uh-huh.
right, if people turn
Developer.
around and spend the money.
and
Right, or
send it
if
back-
we have to,
and
yeah,
send it back into white hands,
Yeah.
basically, right?
I mean, some of that's
essentially.
going to happen, you know, because we don't have a sufficient array of Black businesses to support, you know, all of the needs of the community. We just don't, they don't exist. You know, so some of that I think is unavoidable, but, you know, there is a lot that's, you know, that cities can do to build up, you know, some of these Black business concerns.
But no, I was going to say though, you know, there's lots of things
You can
people,
direct your investments
lots
too.
of things people could do with the funds that would actually build their own wealth or possibly build community wealth, even if purchases are being made from whites. So for example, if you purchased a home, that would be a form
An
of
asset.
wealth accumulation and asset. If you were to start up your own business, or you were to put additional funds into an existing Black-owned business, then there's a developmental dimension there as well. If you were to purchase land that was deployed for non-residential purposes, you know, whether it's a rental property or whether or not it was space in the Sea Islands that currently is being used extensively for high-priced resorts. You know, and that was land that originally should have gone to the formerly enslaved under General Sherman's Special Order number 15. But you know, individuals could purchase real estate. They could purchase land and use that as an investment property. They could purchase financial assets. And that could help them build their individual wealth and make it something that's transferable across generations in the same way in which white families have long transferred wealth across generations. So the mere fact of making a purchase that is from somebody who is white doesn't necessarily mean it's not beneficial and it's not contributing to Black wealth growth.
I think
Brian, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, where do I start? This is such a great conversation. I have so many questions and thoughts. Since this is under the rubric of state and local concepts of reparations and whatnot, I've been dying to ask, since you brought up the Durham City Council's resolution. Well, one, was there any specificity in the resolution? And you guys made a point of, this is such a focal point in the book, that this would be a federal government outlay, right? And not a local outlay or not a state outlay of cash. So was that included in the resolution from the Durham City Council? And then my second question with that is, I'm fascinated about what the pushback on that. I have family in Durham that are not, they voted for Trump. I'll just put it out there. And I got to imagine that the pushback in the community just was fierce, I would assume. Like, and I'm so fascinated to hear that from your perspectives living there.
So it's interesting. I mean, you may know more about the pushback than we do. I don't know that there was significant pushback, actually.
I'm not even sure people are all that aware of it.
So
I don't know.
So, you know,
Yeah.
we became aware of the initiative in March, and I think they voted in June.
No.
You know, COVID giveth and COVID taketh away, you know. So the city council deliberations are all available online. You know, but one needs to tune in to see what's going on. And, you know, certainly the website is very informative about what they were doing. And there've been a couple of articles, you know, the local kind of free newspaper, The Independent, has done a couple of stories on it. Now, at the same time, well, not the same time, but maybe 2 years ago, one of our city council members advocated for a racial equity task force to be created. And that group deliberated for over 2 years and released its report, I guess at the end of the summer.
Right.
And, they're asking people to sign on and endorse that report. I don't know that. So we've been trying to get the city council to create a mechanism for local residents to formally endorse the resolution. And they're working on that. Like, will it be a scan code? Like, how do you do that? I mean, we don't have a reparations office in Durham. So, who would be the people who would be in charge of keeping track of that? Yeah. But that would be the next step. Yeah. I mean, Durham, I don't want to, I'm a very strong booster for Durham, but as you all know, North Carolina is a wicky-wacky state when it comes to politics. And we have a long history of supporting Democratic governors and Republican presidents. It's just odd. I can remember soon after we moved here, we came to understand that there were legions of people who simultaneously supported Jim Hunt, who was a liberal, for governor, but also Jesse Helms. And we were just confounded by that, just confused. I'm still confused by that. We just elected a Black Republican lieutenant governor, who, as far as I can tell, his main claim to glory is that he's a pro-gun activist.
Yeah, well,
he had a video that went viral, was relatively unknown in politics.
Yeah.
And there you have it.
Well, we re-elected Democratic governor.
Yeah.
So
very unusual state in some ways. We're not politicians or political strategists.
We're mostly confused.
We're mostly confused on these dimensions.
Yeah, I think the same can be said in Missouri. Like
agreed.
We recently voted against a measure for gerrymandering, redistricting that was passed just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So all that work, just
yeah,
down the drain.
Yeah, but Brian, you may have a better antenna into who is hostile towards the city council's resolution, but we just really haven't heard much at all said about it, at least in the circles that we travel in.
Yeah, I confess I haven't talked to my brother who's out there since the election. That conversation is coming, but I think that your point from the outset is right, that people just aren't connected to what's going on a day-to-day basis enough to be able to respond to it. But it's great. I mean, it's fascinating, and yeah, anyway.
I mean, it's not as if we don't have a lot of other things that are really pressing people here, but reparations would make a lot of that simpler. People always say, well, it's not clear, what the effects of reparations would be, and will it solve all the problems we have? And I said, well, I don't know that it would solve all the problems that we have, but let's run that experiment and see, what the effects would be. Can't we just run that experiment?
Let's try it.
Let's give it a shot.
And to anyone who would ask that question, I honestly say that the answer would be yes. I mean, clearly we have lots of systemic issues in Black communities that money won't solve everything, but money is a way for us to have access to solving those issues. And reparations isn't just a check. It's also policies that put in place to be a buffer from the racial issues that we have experienced thus far living in America. So I think that, the monthly payments or however else, plus policies would elevate us to a protected class, to saying that you can't discriminate against us in the workplace, that you can't, spew out vile rhetoric to us online, things like that. So I think all of those things would be helpful, would be necessary to Black Americans when you're considering a reparations agenda, a full, pure reparations agenda. So, like you said, Miss Mullen, let's try it. Let's see what happens.
So, Kara, I want to be the devil's advocate for just a second and say, let's just say it is just a check. Okay, so that's going to be our premise, that it is just a check. So what could we do with that check? All right. So one could access higher quality health care. One could purchase a house in a higher amenity neighborhood. One could participate in politics, since we know that politics requires money. And one could be involved in the whole polity in a very different kind of way. One could afford, expert legal counsel when you needed to do so. One could have influence in a community so that the local police knew that there would be consequences when they targeted you or other, Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. That check, distributed to all Black American descendants of U.S. slavery would make a tremendous difference. It's also not clear to me that you can legislate this protected class. I don't know how you would do that. But what you can do is provide the financial means to dramatically transform the lives of Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
So we frequently say that what the objective is to provide the material conditions for full citizenship.
Absolutely.
Now, there are non-material conditions for full citizenship, and I think that's what you're referring to in terms of this protected class status. But I'm not sure.
Something similar to how how LGBTQ have, you can't, something along the lines of protections that way, how you can't commit hate crimes against someone just because they're gay. Just like, you wouldn't be able to just discriminate against
The laws are the same. Applicable to Blacks. So I'm trying to get a better sense of what's meant.
I mean, as far as
class status.
Something as far as along the lines of police brutality, for example. Like we know the stats saying that Black Americans are more likely to be victims of police brutality. Yeah. That would be a systemic issue that hopefully a reparations agenda would solve.
But in principle, once again, under the existing laws, what the police are doing is breaking the law. So the issue then remains whether or not they're prosecuted by the full force of the law. And that's the problem. They haven't been. And so, it's not necessarily a question of changing the content or the text of the law. It's a question of whether or not the laws that exist are actually enforced.
Can I jump in with a question, since we're just got on the topic of policing generally? Kiara, do you mind?
We can stay on another 10 minutes or so.
Oh shoot.
That's okay. Yeah.
Then Kiara, you direct traffic, because that's
okay. Well, I guess my follow-up question to that would be, if the laws are not being upheld, then you're saying that reparations would be a buffer to that. Like we would have the money to access good lawyers in order to get those laws enforced the way that they should be.
And also to affect who's elected. Right. If you have elected leaders who are supporting the police in their illegal activities, those individuals can be voted out. Yeah.
I mean, we certainly think that policies to pull the knife out are needed, as well as policies to heal the wound. and we only see reparations as healing the wound. But yeah, the knife needs to be pulled out too. So there are other kinds of policies like getting rid of qualified immunity for the police that we think are desirable. But that doesn't diminish the importance of, I guess, what people are referring to as getting the check.
Or deciding that when the police are involved in this litigation, that the funding for those cases comes from their pension fund and not from the public tax base, for example.
Well, yeah,
Brian, you had a question.
Brian, you had a question, and then I think Foss had one. It's not Al, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm in the
Yeah, Miss Al.
Y'all
Did you want to jump in?
I've asked a million questions. I'll go last.
Okay.
Al, you muted.
Hello to
Let's
the
go to
both
Al
of you,
first.
and it's
Let's go
an
to Al first.
honor.
Okay.
I'm Alvonia. My question is,
Okay,
how
I'll go
has
ahead.
the U.S. been able to get around the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments with different discriminations? You know, we have policy on the books, but how has the U.S. been able to manipulate these laws?
Yeah, well, one way you manipulate laws is by ignoring them. It's a long tradition of that in the United States. But of course, the 13th is, as you know, it has that exception clause, which actually opens the door for slavery to be reintroduced through imprisonment. So, so that's how the 13th can be used. But I think that the content of the other laws are a question of the discretion of the way in which the courts interpret the laws and apply the laws. And you know, they can manufacture ways to make the law do something other than what presumably it was intended to do.
Okay, we know you all said you only have a few more minutes, so I guess my last question is, I really don't have one right now. Does anyone else have any additional questions for Mr. Darity and Mr. Mullen? All right, go ahead, Layton.
Is there anything more consequential to the ADOS experience in America, or outside of the racial wealth gap? Because from what I read and what I understand, nothing is more consequential outside of being black in the descendant of slavery. But outside of that, I don't know that there's anything more consequential than the racial gap. Based on your expertise, is there something that's more consequential to the ADOS experience in America other than the racial wealth gap?
Not if we're looking at economic status. There is nothing that more effectively captures the cumulative intergenerational effects of white supremacy than the racial wealth differential.
Gotcha. All right, that was a big thing for me. Sorry about that, y'all.
Well, and we do know that that racial wealth gap began immediately after the end of the Civil War, when the black, the freedmen were denied 40-acre land grants, while at the same time, white Americans, including new immigrants to the U.S., were granted 160-acre land grants, right? So, blacks promised 40 acres and received nothing, and whites promised 160 acres, which they do receive. And so, they received something along the lines on the order of 287 million acres of land, a land mass equivalent to, all of the West Coast, basically, all of Washington State, Oregon, California, Nevada, plus Massachusetts, or put another way, all of Texas and all of California. Some 1.5 million families, basically, were given, that opportunity. And today, and so this is a land that you could farm it, you could subdivide it, you could lease it to others, Any minerals found on the land were yours to keep. The land was tax-free, but importantly, you could borrow against it to set up your own business or to pay for your children's private schooling or their college tuition. And significantly, you could transfer, you could bequeath that land and all, you could bequeath that land and all of the profits from it to your children, right? Which many of them did. And so we know that this, that wealth, basically captures the sort of cumulative effects, right? Of, intergenerational effects of passing down the money to the subsequent generations. But this is exactly how white supremacy works. White Americans were allowed to enrich themselves and their families in this way, and Black families were not. But when you look at the data, when you look at the value of that land, that is where the racial wealth gap begins. There are a lot of people who feel that they're self-made, or we did this by the dint of our own struggle. And yes, you certainly may have put in a tremendous amount of work, but the grub stake, that nest egg, that was something that you received just as a consequence of being born into a family that was, given this largesse in the first place. These Patriot Awards, as a friend of ours calls them. Yeah, that's what Ron Johnson calls them.
I have one more, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
You've mentioned a couple times that you don't consider yourselves political strategists, but having said that, I've got to ask you a political strategy comment, particularly as it looks like Pennsylvania just got officially declared for Biden. Does either of you think that we started the conversation we talked about coronavirus and how that affects the Black community in 4 to 5 years. But I look at the future of this country and I can't see past a year from now. And so there's such a hopeful tenor to the book, but I wonder, there's such an urgency in every demographic, in every socioeconomic class in this country for varied reasons, of course. And I wonder, can this happen right now? And would it be better to grab a hold of the urgency in the country right now, or let the convulsion that's happen and then like a surfer, ride that wave after it and say, okay, we've convulsed, as we heal, let's do it right this time. So that's a big question, and do with it what you will.
But you want to start on this?
I'll start by saying I don't think the different social economic groups are affected in the same way. There's no comparison across the different strata. Every group, I'm sure, has issues that are important and immediate to them, but everybody is not facing eviction. Everyone is not facing starvation.
Everyone
is not facing unemployment.
Everyone's not facing the mortality rates
right.
that are associated with the disease that Black folks are facing.
I just meant with respect to the sense of urgency that people have. I know it's not equal or fair, or applies the same way, but just the national sense of urgency that everyone has for different reasons.
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of a recovery process that people are seeking from the emergence of outright fascism, bold-faced fascism in the United States. And I'm not sure if people are just going to take a breath of relief and not really pursue any substantive changes, or if this will be taken as an opportunity to really engage in an effort to transform American society. Honestly, I just don't know.
Yeah, that's my fear.
We don't have, as a country, a good track record of putting our heads down, as a country. I wouldn't say this is the case with Black American descendants of U.S. slavery, because we've had no choice but to put our heads down and to put your shoulder to the wheel and keep working. But for many of us in this country, this is the first time that they have had to struggle. This is the first time that they have faced hardship. But if hardship is not having the selection of I don't want to make it too trivial, but not having the selection of potato chips that you're used to at the store, that's not really hardship. Or not being able to go to your favorite restaurant, that's not really hardship. But it remains to be seen how we will handle this. At many stages, there have been moments when Blacks and whites were poised to co-govern together, or were even doing so. But something happened to cause the whites, maybe not the whites who were actually involved in co-governing, but perhaps it was those who were watching from a distance saying, oh, this is odd. We need to disrupt this. And, whether they actually conscripted the whites who had been, harmoniously, co-governing, or if they, told them, you just step aside and we'll handle this ourselves. But those moments were disrupted.
Or they push them aside.
Or they pushed them aside, yeah, and killed some of them. Yeah, that did happen also. Yeah, that certainly did happen in North Carolina for sure. But the question is, will we have the will? Do we have the will to, to hold in there, to hold each other accountable? I think, the quest for reparations is difficult. It has a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of promise. But, I'm not going to say we're not built for it, but we don't have a lot of experience, engaging in prolonged struggle. We just don't. And certainly this generation, we haven't had the opportunities for the most part. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. That's partly my personality. I've seen more signs that I've not seen before. Certainly, just the individuals who have been willing to step forward. I can remember when, it was just political suicide to mention the R word, reparations. And that's not the case, at the moment. So, I don't know what, and I always say too, there are always things that an individual can do. I always get hope when I'm acting, when I'm making some steps, even if they're small and incremental steps. And so if you make a list yourselves of the things that you're going to do, this week, this month, and tick them off the box, tick the box and work to the next thing, as opposed to, waiting for some grand plan. There are a lot of things that individuals can do right now, today, to move the needle forward.
Well, we have to exit now, but thank you so much for having us join you. And thanks for working with our book.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the book.
Yeah, thank you.
It's wonderful to meet you all.
Take
Have this
care.
conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
We love
Bye.
Kansas City.
Oh, you appreciate that. Okay, wow. So
That was dope.
yeah. So okay, well, so that's like so much to unpack. We can start where they left off with saying what brought on the recent surges in pushing for reparations. And I'll just say I think it was Obama's presidency that really did it. Yeah, because in 2008 people were like, oh, we're going to have our first Black president and he's going to do so much for us. Like Black Americans came out for him like they've never came out for anybody else. So I think by by 2012, there were Black Americans were like, oh, he's not really doing for us like I thought. And that's when you started seeing issues of, okay, lineage. Well, he's Black, but he's Kenyan, and his mom's half white. So I think that's because people were trying to figure out, like, okay, we voted this Black man into office, but he's not doing for Black people what we thought he should be doing. Why is that? So then that's we started seeing what the push for what would have been, what would have we know today is reparations. I think there was a lot in the Obama Biden administration that was a jumping off point for what we see in politics today. And we don't give a lot of that credit. I mean, Biden himself, like, he came in there under the 94 crime bill, you know, 40 plus years of pushing for those policies. We're not ignoring that anymore based off of him being the vice president then, based off of Biden being the president in 2008 through 2015.
But don't we?
So that's just my take. That's just those are just my reasons for why people are getting on board with it now. We're looking like, okay, we had a Black president who didn't do for us what we thought he should. You know, we have a Black vice president who has said she's not going to do for us either. We need reparations. We need politicians who are going to answer for what the systemic issues in America are.
Yeah, I think you telling, I'm sorry, I ain't raised my hand, my bad. I just want to chime in. I think you telling the truth. What you just said right there, we can't expect people that ain't ADOS to care about ADOS. So that's all I wanted to say right there. And you did point that out.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I'll say that I feel like if we had, but the folly in that, unfortunately, lies in the fact that any person who, at least then, at least during 2012, 2008, any person who would have come out and said flat out, I'm for ADOS and I'm for reparations, it wouldn't have even been elected. So if Obama were doing something like that, he wouldn't have even been in a position to do anything. Now, I think, honestly, the folly kind of lies on us because, like Kiara said, and she said it twice, we thought that he should be doing X, Y, and Z or whatever, but he never promised that he was going to do anything. You know, so that honestly, in some respects, that kind of lies on us and creating expectations when none of us have ever reached out to him. Well, I won't say none of us have, because I know he did have talks with Cornel West and Tavis Smiley before he kind of ousted them from his administration, from his advisory board. But prior to that, like, I'll say that, you know, it would be kind of difficult for someone like him, you know, or for anybody, especially then, to just come out and say, hey, I'm for ADOS and this is what I'm about, and you know, I'm for the people. Yeah, I'm for all the people, but I also want to make sure that my people are taken care of. You know, so I couldn't even see something like that taking place at that time. You know, now, you know, so we should have been more adamant instead of being, you know, caught up. And I admit it myself, you know, because I was somebody who actually volunteered and worked for the Obama campaign, going around the canvassing in Lee Summit, in Grandview, in Bonner Springs even. And so I know kind of what that's about. And I was kind of enchanted, I guess you could say, for a large amount of that into the Obama administration and what this is and what this could be, and to be a part of it and all that stuff. But now it's like, hold on, you ain't gonna do no work though, homie. You know, like that became a feeling kind of early for me. And I think, you know, so to Kiara's credit, I mean, to what she was saying, like, yeah, so I also agree that I feel like, you know, that was kind of our stepping off point where, you know, we realized, wait, we had these expectations, but
That's
we never
when
had.
the seeds were planted.
Yeah,
for
that's what I'm
ADOS
saying. That's
today.
what I'm saying. So we had these expectations, but we never put anything together. So wait, we need to get together. We need to get something together and start forming an alliance, and start forming, getting with like-minded individuals who, you know, we can press together some sort of agenda that will allow us to, you know, seek out these things that we feel like are due to us.
Now, I was gonna say, to the point you were making, the first point you were making, in terms of him, like, you know, if Obama comes out and he's like, yo, I'm for ADOS, I'm for all of this, I know, of course, that's gonna be met with a lot of pushback, but I also think it's very important that we keep in mind, most legislators, most policymakers, most lawmakers, they have an idea in mind of who this piece of legislation is gonna help, even though they never say anything. Because we know the data, we know who's going to be affected and why. So my big issue I had with Obama, like, you didn't have to say anything, you just could have did it. You know what I'm saying? This executive orders you passed, this other piece of legislation that didn't require the approval of anybody outside yourself. So if you really wanted to, you could have. And that to me is why I know you didn't really want to, because in 8 years, even with a Democratic House, even with a Democratic Senate, like, you didn't pass anything when you had the opportunity. So then I began to ask myself, at what point do you fight? Because you got to throw a punch. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you ain't throw a punch, it wasn't no point in you being there. Because what I look at, if Obama pushes a reparations agenda for the ADOS community and it fails, well, the next time we come back, we'll come back stronger than we did the first time. And that's how the law eventually gets passed. But you got to start somewhere. That's the issue I have with a lot of people out here talking is, well, they'll never pass it. Yeah, but we got AB 3121. You know what I'm saying? We have the edits to HR 40. We have an agenda plan. Like, what we don't have are black people. Like, we're a grassroots group, and we're trying to, like we always talk about, rule number one, you have to educate. You have to give that political literacy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, just to add on, like, we don't have black people in positions of power who have that authority to press or push any sort of agenda that could end up with results. You know, that could lead to actual results for us. Like that's what we don't have.
So, but then with that being said, because this is another argument I get into, you know, those people aren't in positions. Who are in position? Because we got elected black people. We got people that we voted for to put there to do this specific job. And not only has it not gotten done, but it's never been done. So it makes me feel like the whole way we playing the game don't work, because we've been voting Democratic for 60 years. And we still the same, in the worst position now. So it makes me look aside at every elected official, like, what is you doing in the rooms? Because I know whatever it is, it ain't affecting my household. So I think that's something we got to stay vigilant. Sure, for sure.
Hold on, Miss Al, did you want to jump in?
Yes, my comment is about when Dr. Darity and Ms. Mullen mentioned, you know, about that Durham resolution and how we can go out and we can create a petition, you know, to submit to Congress on behalf of reparations. With that being said, you know, Obama spoke with the NAACP, and remember, he encouraged us to enforce it through anti-discrimination opposed to reparations. So he made a statement, but I think at the time we were so in love with Obama, we really wasn't listening to what he was actually saying, because he did speak on reparations, you know what I mean? But we had this love affair with Obama, and that's my comment.
Even with that, I think that we've had decades of being indoctrinated to certain narratives. So even when we did hear Obama speaking at a college graduation ceremony, telling Black American college graduates that they don't have any excuses and they need to do what they need to do to succeed. And we were like, yeah, absolutely. Do you hear what he's saying to you? Yes, You Black college graduate who somehow or another beat the odds. Yep, you need to do better. Mm-hmm. So because that's what we've heard for so long, and we've had enough of us that have succeeded in life, that they were in the right place at the right time, that they got those good federal jobs, and they were able to get into the post office when they did, and they built up a little bit of wealth. They were able to elevate into what we consider Black middle class, which again, we've had that debate before, so we all know what it is. But still, they got a little bit of money, and they were able to use that to look down on the rest of ADOS. What we know now is ADOS, and say, oh well, I'm not like my cousin. I'm not like my, don't be like your auntie. Get a good job, go to college. So we see that, and then we hear him, and we're like, yep, absolutely right. But now that we have the shift in the culture, we're saying no, these are systemic issues that have not been addressed. It's not enough to say pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, no, we don't have boots. So I think it's,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I hope that everyone recognizes how much this resonates for me too. Like I worked at Obama HQ in Chicago when I was in law school, and I walked the streets of Kansas City in 2012. And Chris, you mentioned Tavis Smiley and Cornel West. Don't forget, Larry Summers was part of his Council of Economic Advisors right away. There's no more of a neoliberal institutionalist than that dude. And I wish I had, in that question to Dr. Darity and Ms. Mullen, I wish I had used the word institutionalism, because the purpose of my question was we all looked at Obama and thought, this guy is really going to buck the system, open change. He's going to take, to Leighton's point, he's going to punch the system in the mouth, right, and shake things up.
And we're in there now. We gonna do some stuff. Yeah.
And then he gets in office, and he's a total institutionalist, to a maddening degree. He couldn't the whole idea that he would get things through Congress. It seems so laughably naive now. And so part of my question to Dr. Darity and Mrs. Mullen was the urgency is an anti-establishment, anti-institutional fervor in this country. And I'm the only problem, and it's not even a problem, the only concern I have about the notion of reparations as designed in the book is that it relies so heavily on institution that exists, the federal government, and creating a new one, the national, the NRB, National Reparations Bureau, right? And we're at this moment where anti-institutionalism is at its zenith. And I'm that was my point about using the surfer on a wave metaphors. Maybe you have to wait a few years and say this stuff has to crumble first, and then when we rebuild it, we can actually do it right. And I have no idea if that's right or not, but that's my point.
The way, and I don't want to speak for the group, but I definitely speak for myself. The understanding that I have when it comes to the right timing is just like they talked about with the knife analogy as well as the hot stove analogy. We've been suffering so long, it's every day. It can't be no wait. This has been the issue for so long, we got to go now. Because one thing I hate that I didn't get to bring up, because I really feel like I was talking a whole bunch. And I was
no, you did good.
And I do this all day. Please shut me up. But I wanted to ask him, and I'll probably email him or something. When we look at Black wealth going to zero at 2053, when we look at the what they call it, the wealth transfer that's happening currently, the $65 trillion wealth transfer. What does that look like in addition to what we've seen with Corona? That sped that time up. So now in addition, that's another reason that it ain't no ride to wave. We shouldn't be on the wave. Like this has been happening and constantly happening since we've been here. So I think we just gotta, to be honest with you, a little analogy we use where I'm from, you gotta get in the box. And when you get in the box, it's gonna be ugly. But that's what you gotta do. So you get in the box and you knock everybody out until you come out on top. It ain't nowhere in between from how I understand it. Because like you said, once, we're looking at, how wealth is plummeting, and we know what majority of the ADOS community are homeowners. Home ownership has been down in the Black community more now than it was in the 60s. So now when we look at it, people are renting, people are losing their jobs. And I think what they call it, Skid Row in LA, I think is a perfect example of what will happen nationwide. Because now people are getting evicted. The CARES Act, I'm not sure what happened to it after it expired, if they ran some other type of legislation to help that. We're just going to be on the streets. And then it's just going to be a cover up like, oh, well, Black people didn't do what they were supposed to do. And that's another reason why we can't, ain't no way. It's either go now or get left, as far as I understand.
Yeah. And I think one of the answers to that is to say, like, the conversation is part of what tears the institution down. As opposed to saying, we'll wait until it's torn down and then rebuild it. Like, no, like, let's start throwing those punches and knocking the building down in the course of the context of saying, like, this needs to happen now. Which is my whole point about the urgency comment. Like, there's such an urgency. It's like, this could be the moment to do it. Or strategically, maybe someone says, no, let's wait 3 years and see what happens. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know that there's ever a good moment to fight for Black people in America. Like, when has there ever been the right moment? Like, from slavery to post-slavery to
I think we also, let's be honest, we haven't been asking that question since the 1960s and 70s during the civil rights movement of that time frame. Like, we're just now asking these questions again in 2020. ADOS has only been around 2 or 3 years, going strong for about 2 years. All right, go ahead, Ms. Al.
I would like to say the urgency is in the community itself, with the discrepancies caused by COVID and all the inequalities. The urgency is in the community. We have no choice really but to move and take action and mobilize, because it's just that desperate. It's desperate for ADOS right now. It's vague, just extremely, just grim and desperate.
And I also want to add that with this urgency, 2020 has just been a perfect storm of so many events that all correlated into us saying enough is enough. Who could have really predicted just how devastating this year would have been? Economically, politically, emotionally. There are people out there who say, like, oh, eventually we would have had another pandemic. Who could have predicted it would have been during an election year? Who? So I think that with that urgency that Brian was mentioning, we have to also acknowledge that if it had not been for events leading up until now, that if there hadn't been the Ferguson protest, which brought on the uprising of Black Lives Matter, if it hadn't been for the Obama presidency and people being like, well, he didn't do anything for us. If it hadn't been for ADOS coming in and saying, well, we need specificity in the Black American community, it could have been it could have been an issue of, yeah, Black people need something, but we don't know what. If it hadn't been for all those events that led up to now, that kind of built up the foundation for ADOS to even come into existence, we could have just been like, kind of going back to a comment Layton made earlier, it's like, I guess it is our fault. Black Americans, Black Americans can say like, well, yeah, y'all are getting kicked out of your apartments, but it's because look at how much money you wasted. And y'all should have been saving up as much money as you possibly could. It sucks for y'all. So without the context of all those other events that led up to ADOS being necessary, we could have just been like, without the information, without people highlighting and showcasing the data, without economists and political commentaries and all that stuff, we would have just been SOL this year.
Well, but and I wonder, because what I want to give credit to, and I think we have to, I think we've always fought. You know what I'm saying? We've always said something ain't right. We've always been vigilant in fighting. But I think the issue, and I think it's Malcolm. I think it was Martin that said. No, it's Malcolm that said it. We're not outmanned. We're out organized. Like, we're not organized. We're not on the same page. We don't agree on the same stuff. That's our issue. If we coalesce around what our issues is and move as a unit, we got off the plantation. I tell y'all all the time. To me, ain't nothing more harder in the world than getting off the United States of America slave plantation. And we were able to do that. And we had a literacy rate that was not known to modern man at that point. From the time we got off the plantation till a couple of years, like 10 years later, I think we had a really high literacy rate. But I think it's just a matter of organizing, having the right conversations, and being consistent. Because, the group always like to bring up their forum. They was like, yo, I'm glad the elections is over, so we ain't got to hear from the Russians no more. And it's like, ain't that funny? Because we ain't going nowhere. We just got started, to be honest. Now we can start coming at Biden and Kamala and the whole cabinet to get legislation what we need. And, I was really excited that Darity pointed out, the wealth gap is the most consequential thing in our lives. So how do we change that? And if it ain't that, you ain't talking about Black issues. That's how I understand.
And I'm actually really glad also that he emphasized that, because we do have dialogues about all those other things that we talked about, affirmative action, investing in communities, the federal minimum wage. But like he said, our main focus has to be closing the wealth gap, because in that lies the reparations that we need.
And that should be, and I'm not saying it's a catch-all, but like we discuss all the time, if you have the wealth, you can afford the healthcare, you can afford the housing, you can afford the education if you so choose to have it. You can afford, better equity in homes, you can afford to live in better neighborhoods, or more importantly, remain in the neighborhoods you're in. Now, because everybody has money, we can do the infrastructure upgrades. You know what I'm saying?
There's no risk of gentrification if everybody in the neighborhood has money to invest into it.
Yes. So, and I don't know that. I think once we can get that particular point on a national discussion, because what I hear a lot of times, people are like, well, what's your solution? And, I'm quick. ADOS, ADOS want to run back on Black agenda. Boom, this is the solution. And then it's like, well, what is all that? No, you got to read it, because that encompasses everything. And if we get, like he talked about, the federal jobs guarantees, that's on that list. It talks about it, as well as ownership and manufacturing and other types of industries. So I think it's one of those things. I was a little concerned, though, like when he started talking about the All Lives Matter jobs guarantees, I was like, whoa. But he explained it, and I was like, okay, I got you.
And also, with that, I think we just that little snippet. I mean, I think we've also talked or heard several times, like, and a reparations agenda, yes, it's for Black Americans, but just as a trickle down, it would benefit other communities as well. Maybe not intentionally, but just as an effect of reparations, something along those lines. But with this, with so Joe Biden, uh, at least according to the Associated Press, is president. You know, he had, I think right now it's 284 versus 214 electoral votes. So for all intents and purposes, Biden is president. So what now? To those people who said, "Oh, we ain't got to hear from ADOS no more." What do you mean? So I guess I'm posing that question to the rest of the group as well. Joe Biden is president. Harris is vice president. What now? What's going to happen to Black Americans now? We're still in the midst of COVID. We haven't recovered yet. Darity and Mullen said that they're currently doing research on the effects of COVID on Black Americans. But I can just say just my personal experience with COVID is that I went from working full time to only being able to work part time because my daughter isn't able to go to in school classes. So that's how it's affecting me personally. Like I'm burning through my savings trying to make sure we keep up with the rent and all of our other bills. You know, unemployment benefits stopped months ago. So that's how it's affecting me. Like eventually, unless I'm able to figure out a way to go back to work full time to be able and unless her school reopens, I'll say, because let's be honest, right now I can't afford private childcare for her, you know, to be able to have someone, you know, watch her during the day while I work. So that's kind of where I am just personally. Like I'm covering a full household of bills on a temporary part-time salary. So eventually, if things don't change, eventually I'm gonna run out of savings. So that's just me personally. That's how COVID is affecting me right now. Now it becomes a question of, okay, what then? You know, how is when it comes to others, um how is the current climate affecting you as a Black American? Biden's in office. What do we do now? Go ahead, Miss Al.
Well, for me, I just wanted to say, as far as where do we go as a strategy, we have to realize the worst of the plight for Black America is it's better our chance of organizing. Because if it wasn't any pain or struggle, I don't think people would take up the cause unless, you know, this was do or die, and which it is. How COVID has affected me, I like myself, to be honest, I had been sick when COVID started. And being out sick, I lost my job in March, you know, so, and being out sick, you know, on the leave, I didn't qualify for unemployment. So like yourself, I'm burning through my savings, you know what I mean? And I guess in about, you know, a couple months, I hate to say it, you know, I may be that homeless ADOS, you know, just to be honest, you know what I mean? And you know, and especially like Kiara mentioned, being gainfully employed, you know what I mean? And you considered yourself making strides, you saved money, you did everything you were supposed to do, and yet and still you're sitting here at your wit's end wondering, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? So I think it's time for us to mobilize. You know, it's time to, you know, get feet on the ground. That's all.
I was gonna say, you know, since COVID started, it's For me, I can't lie, y'all, man. 2020, you know, just despite the obvious, I've had a lot of people die. Like I had like 7 family members pass over the past 4 or 5 months. So that's been real G'd up. But it's been enlightening because I spend a lot of time at home. I spend a lot of time reading and self-care and eating right and all that kind of stuff. But I can't lie. A part of me feels selfish because, you know, I got sent home in February. And when I say sent home, I had to work from home. Like they said, y'all go home. And they was like, don't come back till August, is what they told me in February. And then August came around, or July came around, and they was like, we ain't gonna discuss coming back to the office till January. So it's like, you know, I can work from home. I'm still able to pay my bills. I'm actually saving way more money now. I don't go nowhere. And it's like, I can't lie, I feel guilty. Because here it is, I'm enjoying myself and all of this, and I think about my people. And it ain't pretty over there. And since COVID has been a thing, like I find myself like when I order DoorDash sometimes, I make sure to tip. And y'all, this is probably a little, you know, I don't want to get into that, but I'll tip $20 to the delivery people. You know what I'm saying? And they'll be like, yo, $20. I'll be like, yo, bro, I know it's hard out here, and I ain't hurting right now. So, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna do what I can to help you because I ain't gonna miss this little $20. But this might help you do something for you and your kids or whatever. So I try to do things like that and even giving away clothes and stuff like old shoes and clothes. Like I pull up on the homeless people like, hey man, I got size 11s. You know what I'm saying? I'm a large, extra large tees. Like I try to be active in those ways. But it's been good for me personally. But like, you know, it's been transformative because like I say, at one point I had an uncle, and it's funny we talk about black men because the push is on black men right now, right? So like I lost 7 older black men in my family. Like I'm like the second oldest person, the second oldest male in my family on one side now. So it's like they're dead and they're gone. And so now family structures have changed. It's been a lot, but I think this is why this is so important. That's why that interview with Darity is so important. Because we gotta move this, y'all. We gotta make this happen. It ain't just gonna fall out the sky. We're gonna have to fight for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just to jump in, so COVID may not be affecting all Black Americans exactly the same way, but even in the stories that I shared and Ms. Al shared, it's 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 unusual for an entire ethnic group of people to go from having decent paying or whatever full-time jobs to running the risk of becoming homeless by next year. And with Leighton was your story, it's unusual for whole collectives of people to have multiple deaths within 1 year. To go, I mean, you said that you're the second oldest man in your family now, right?
On my mother's side, yes.
On your mother's side. How old are you?
I'm 33.
33. So for you to have whole a whole generation of older, hopefully wiser men gone now, that's unusual. And those are the disparities that we're all talking about. So whether they're emotional, spiritual, physical, financial, this right now, COVID is really affecting us despairingly. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in and share their story. But
Hey, how y'all doing? Now, I was just sitting back and listening. I mean, that's what I do. I sit back and listen and I watch. And we talking about coalitions, talking about coming to the table and talking about uplifting our people. And one thing that I've been sitting back and I noticed, they don't want to give somebody that ain't got no job, no money, you know, but it's a coalition of people out here advocating for that, to give everybody some money every month.
Yes.
I know it ain't specific to ADOS. I know it ain't. But then we talk about building coalitions and stuff, but we won't get behind giving everybody some money every month just because it ain't only for us. So when we think about rationalizing and logical and strategic thinking and getting something for our people, I don't see how that's even common sense. I know what they put into it. I know it's some issues with, the safety net programs or whatever, but we talking about coming to the table. So if just because we get behind an issue, that means we got to take it for what it is. If we got problems with the issue, let's come to the table and try to talk it out. And that's one issue that I know that would especially help us during COVID, because ain't nobody getting nothing. And that will give people that ain't even working money. But as far as I can see, we won't get behind it because it ain't just for us. And because we think that it's set in stone. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, I think to that end, I know Cori Bush, she posted about bringing policies about universal health care to the Senate when she gets in there. And even I said to that as a response, I'm like, well, you may be pushing for universal health care for everybody, but not everybody needs universal health care. Just thinking only specific groups, low income people would need it. So I just think so in that vein, I would say perhaps if the policies were more geared towards being for the people who actually need them, instead of saying that they're for everybody, that they would be better served. We wouldn't be wasting resources trying to create programs like that for everybody when everybody doesn't need them.
I gotta jump. I gotta get off the call a little early. But
all right. Well, it's almost 11:30, so
We be going
this has
in.
been great. I so appreciate the fact that you're able to get Dr. Darity and Ms. Mullen. I mean, it was great. Great conversation. I imagine we could do that a dozen times, and
I'm sure.
yeah.
I was actually I was so nervous, excited when I saw his message. I'm like, oh, really? You
Yeah.
want to join us? Okay. All right, sure. Okay. Yes. All right. Yeah. We'll work that out. Yes. But I'm so glad that they came in today. There was so much good information that they provided for us.
Can I comment on Dr. Darity? I was so excited, Kiara. Believe it or not, I'm a bookworm. I don't even watch TV. I just read. And I was so excited. I couldn't even contain myself for the last 2 weeks. That's just how excited I was. I was just like, I can't even explain it, y'all. I am still so excited. So it was a wonderful thing that you did. And I'm glad that you accepted. And it was an enjoyable conversation. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, I agree. Well, all right, Brian, we will see you Tuesday, hopefully.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. So let's have the meeting on Tuesday, but if you can't make it, we'll definitely see you next Saturday.
Yeah, sorry. Tuesdays are always tricky because I take my son to soccer practice. So I'm like on the road, literally, and we drive way south. So I'm always like right in the middle of the calls. I'm in the car. So.
Oh, okay.
But if I can't make it Tuesday, I'll be there Saturday for sure.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
Bye, all.
Bye. All right. So, does anyone have any final thoughts, so to speak, that they want to add in before we head out for the day?
No, I know for me, enjoyed the call. I definitely felt it a big need to be real straight up with this guy.
Yeah, I like how we were able to clarify a lot of some of the discussions we had, like, oh, I'm not sure about this, or what about this? I really feel like he was able to look club like, no, this is like 1, 2, 3, ABC. So that really was like really helpful.
And for future reference, I also, because hopefully we'll be able to get other people, around his area to come in and have a conversation. But I think it's very important that to get them here, we gotta be on. Like we gotta, and respectfully, definitely respectfully, definitely cordially. But he cleared it up. I didn't have any further questions. I said I really wanted to get to the things that we talked about, and I think that we did. And it was great. Like I say, I think I really enjoyed it. And it was really productive.
I think we will for sure. All right, Miss Al.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what they said about starting a petition, looking at that Durham resolution. And maybe we can, moving forward, speak on that as a group, starting a petition throughout the Missouri, St. Louis and the Kansas City area and present it to Congress.
Yeah.
Remember they said we can do that as an individual, to take a look at and see what they had, and that's what they did. So that was just something that I thought that maybe we could consider as a group. That would be something monumental to bring to Missouri.
With that,
I agree.
Yeah. Well, guys.
All right. So, all right, that's it. Thank you all for joining us this week. We really appreciate you giving up a portion of your Saturday to join us here in the chat. And for those who are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Again, we will see you here next Saturday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
All right, y'all.